Even when we slept in the hotel today, at night we could hear some noises that sounded like 2 gunshots. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. You're probably not mistaken, this building is quite characteristic of Berlin. It speaks for itself. Indeed, we are in Berlin, but we didn't really come here to admire the beauty of this city, even though the city is truly beautiful. This is related to what we do to our crime channel, and it's connected to what's been happening in Berlin for about 5 years now. So it's about the drastic increase in crime, especially mafia-related crime and organized criminal groups. That's also because we try to refer to the situation in Poland on our channel. I think these are also conclusions for us in Poland, conclusions to be drawn about how everything is arranged and what the possibilities are. And so that there is, I would say, some sense and some logic in all our actions. I invite you to watch the next episode. These vendettas are becoming increasingly brutal. Why is this? Well, this is clan crime because that's what it is. Clan crime, meaning individual large family clans. This crime happened in the 70s and 80s, so it's already more than 50 years old. It started over half a century ago with these Arab clans, and probably the most famous of these clans is the Remo family, which consists of 13 families. But apart from these traditional, I would say, criminal groups, mafia groups like the Russian mafia, the Vietnamese mafia, mafias or groups or Arab clans, there are also Syrian groups, Nigerian groups, Afghan groups, and of course also German groups. There are a lot of them. How do you deal with it? How it started and why these particular groups were able to operate on such a scale, we'll talk about in the next part of our episode. Still, it's getting increasingly brutal. As I mentioned, this crime has worsened in the past 5 years. Berlin is a place that I would say is very important on the map of Europe. It's the largest city in the European Union. There are a lot of, I would say, different economic interests, a lot of things, a lot of money to be made. And where there's big money, of course, criminal groups also appear. They tried to cut a piece of that big pie for themselves. At some point, the division of the city was, let's say, so obvious that there weren't any visible clashes, at least not to someone from outside that environment. But that pie kept getting smaller, especially when Chechen groups started to appear here. The Chechens came into the city and started carving out their piece of the pie with guns and knives, and things started to heat up, really heat up, to the point where it was clear that neither the police nor the authorities could handle it. They asked for mediation at that point. We'll also tell you who mediated in the next part of this episode. Nevertheless, it's becoming more and more dangerous. The Berliners themselves say that they wonder, especially on weekends, whether to go to the city, go to a cafe, or go for a walk, because different things can happen. In December of last year, Victoria came here to the Berliners. She's a girl from Trojmiasto and she just came to visit the city. Unfortunately, criminal groups happened to start a shootout with each other. She got hit by a bullet. The girl died on the spot. She was an innocent victim of this conflict, and that's what they say in Germany too. More and more often, innocent people are becoming victims of these conflicts. These are cyclists, these are guests of cafes, pubs, restaurants. Unfortunately, it's getting worse. As the police officers say, here in Berlin, a new generation is coming into play. These groups are numerous, well organized, and they retaliate immediately. For example, 2 recent stories. A man gets stabbed and falls to the sidewalk. Literally just a few dozen minutes later, There's a shooting in a nearby cafe, and a Cameroonian gets beaten with a baseball bat. Well, it's all connected. It's simply retaliation. They know exactly who's doing it, so they immediately plan an attack, plan revenge, and settle scores among themselves. A story from May of this year, one of the cafes. A young man enters the cafe and shoots a 17-year-old in the legs. Presumably it was meant as a lesson. The 17-year-old survived. But at the same time, a moment later, nearby, not far from the cafe, a regular fight breaks out. 60 men are fighting each other with knives, machetes, and baseball bats. One Turk is killed. And in several neighboring districts, similar situations occur. The scale of these crimes is large. According to official statistics, just last year in Germany, there were about 9,000 various types of shootings and about 30,000 various types of assaults with a knife, with a machete, with other dangerous tools. If we do the math, it turns out that there are over 100 such incidents every day. And of course, these aren't just incidents because it's a fight for life and death, if we were to put it in Polish terms. So if a situation like that, some shooting, happens from time to time, we know how much discussion, commentary, and talk there is about it. And here annually there are about over 9,000 officially registered, because we are aware that many of these kinds of incidents simply can't be verified or counted. Even when we slept in the hotel today, at night you could hear some noises that sounded like 2 gunshots. First one, then another half an hour later. This happens constantly, especially on weekends. When we're here, life really still goes on behind an iron, let's say, curtain. What do these criminal groups in Berlin do? Well, they do what criminal or mafia groups do all over the world. Of course, that's drug trafficking, tons of drugs that are brought in and sold in Berlin, extortion, prostitution, a huge prostitution market, pornography, and money laundering. But increasingly, I would say these are also intellectual crimes. How did these clan families stop hiding? How are they stepping out of their own circles, the leaders of these clans? They're not afraid, they're not ashamed to take pictures of themselves, even with famous rappers. All of this is always changing. But one of their, I would say, key tasks in the world of crime is committing serious thefts, spectacular burglaries like the diamond theft in Dresden or the theft of Swiss watches. And probably the most famous one is the theft from that museum. That's the Bode Museum, known on the so-called Museum Island, because that's exactly where we are right now. It was a spectacular theft because it involves stealing a coin, but it's not just any coin. You can't just take it and go shopping with it, because this coin is 100 kilograms of pure gold, about the size of a large car tire. Well, no one has ever fully appraised it, but we can estimate that the coin was worth about 4.5 million euros. Altogether, in the year 2010, this coin had been here since 2010. It was once minted by the Royal Canadian Mint. Well, that was the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth I's birthday. In total, 6 such coins were minted. 1 is in Canada, and the other 5 ended up in the hands of private collectors, of course, millionaires, billionaires, who have it in their collections. One of these types of collectors donated this coin to the museum in 2010, and one evening the coin was stolen. As it turned out, in a very simple, almost childish way, the thieves just put a ladder up to the museum cloakroom, went inside, then used a hammer to break the armored glass, took out the coin, made some rollers, rolled it to the window, and then threw the coin out the window. Onto the tracks of the train right here next to us. If you look on my left side, there's a train running, and onto the tracks of that train, they threw out the coin. Then they came with wheelbarrows, loaded the coin onto the wheelbarrows, took it to the park, and there most likely they smashed the coin into small pieces with hammers. The police conducted an investigation, and it was known that one of the Arab clans was behind this theft. Here in Berlin, at some point, there were also car races, probably by accident, just like in Poland, where we also have this problem. One of the cars was stopped. After the investigation, it appeared that gold was being transported in that car. The police officers were preparing to conduct a thorough examination. And once again, those from the clan made their presence known. They broke into the police parking lot. They opened the car, set off the fire extinguisher, and tried to use it to erase the traces of gold. Fortunately, after the examination, we still found some fragments. Based on this, 3 men, 3 guys were convicted. Basically, it was her 2 brothers, one 22, the other 24 years old, and their 22-year-old cousin, all from the Remo clan, which is the most well-known Berlin clan, an Arab clan. They all received sentences as well. That's also part of this story. Besides the theft itself, the coin was never found. It was probably just destroyed, broken into pieces. Pieces of that gold ended up somewhere, probably sold to fencers at low prices, and it was lost forever. But that's also, I would say, a kind of way of thinking in this case by the mother of one of those arrested boys. They weren't really concerned that their son would end up in prison. The mother even said that such prison is good for a boy because it turns a boy, a child, into a real man. Well, she herself gave birth to 15 children, so with that attitude, of course, the children also received the right kind of lessons from their mother. How large are these clans? How big are these groups? Well, of course, it's impossible to count exactly, but as the police and prosecutors here say, in Berlin alone there are about 25 clan families. The Remo clan itself, the one I've already told you about, is probably the most well-known. That's about 500 active members, but of course these members have families, they have parents, brothers, sisters, grandparents, and so on, just like anyone else, so they provide great support for those active members. In Germany alone, it's estimated that there are about 200,000 clan members, 200,000. I read that the Bundeswehr currently has about 182,000 soldiers, so you can see that the scale is simply very large. And here's another fact that's surprising actually, because since 2019, so 6 years ago, they created a special program, and this clan crime was even officially called clan crime. There was nothing like this before. Although these traditions in Germany, in Berlin, have already been around for well over half a century, a special 7-point program was also created, and this program is supervised and implemented by the Federal Criminal Police Office in Germany. In Germany, nothing exists like what we have in Poland. The National Police Headquarters, which oversees the entire police force, is a kind of hierarchy that ends at the national headquarters. No, there's nothing like that here. Order and what happens are the responsibility of specific police forces, federal police in a given state or city, but there is also the Federal Criminal Office, which is something like the Central Bureau of Investigation in Poland, meaning it oversees organized crime throughout Germany. This office reports directly to the ministry, so it doesn't fall under any of the states. That's exactly what it deals with. This type of crime has now been defined and named, but as you can see, it was done over 50 years after this crime actually began. What were the beginnings of these clans in Berlin? As I told you, the 70s and 80s, the beginning is Turkish Anatolia. They were expelled from that province. Some of those refugees went to Lebanon and some came to Germany. Here they began to settle. The German authorities at that time, well, of course, those were different authorities, let's call them communist, had a different approach. They also assumed that when the war ended, they would simply return to their country, but nothing like that happened. The war ended, but they didn't return. At first, they were in one district, and after years, they started taking over more districts. And that's how it all went on. It's been going on for many years. Well, back then, the German authorities there were operating under a mistaken assumption. The Germans admit that they made similar mistakes during another large wave of refugees as well. That was in 2015 when once again thousands of young people appeared in Berlin, in Germany. And here a certain kind of, I would say, sluggishness, uncertainty with some sort of, well, entering life in Germany. Those people who arrived, they waited a very long time to find out what would happen to them. They were in refugee centers, and those refugee centers became a great place for recruitment by local criminal groups. What about those already settled in the centers? Young people in their 20s saw their compatriots in expensive cars who had a lot of money, so of course they came to the conclusion that they wanted to live like that too. So those asylum centers became a kind of recruitment place, and then a lot of members joined those criminal groups. It was a kind of recruitment mechanism. It's a kind of life, a world, I would say, that's parallel. The clans, of course, do not recognize or respect German law. Their activities, their lives are based on their own internal law, on customary law, on everything they consider important. That's why talking to them is very difficult. It's proof that this parallel world exists. This is a story that actually began in 2020, or rather it started even earlier. I told you at the beginning that here in the city, wanting to get a piece of the pie, they came in very aggressively, very forcefully, Chechen criminal groups not holding back in their methods. A fight began, a fight started mainly between the Remo clan and the Chechen groups. The situation was very serious. The police couldn't handle it. They didn't know how to solve this situation. There was no one here who could mediate in any way, who could talk to both sides. There just wasn't such an authority. It wasn't the authorities or any local politician, not even a national one, because no one like that was recognized. The situation was becoming tense because the Chechens have a kind of diaspora, you know. It means that even though they are scattered in different parts of the world, they maintain a very strong bond with each other. When something happens in a certain country, they gather together and go to that country to help. And that's how it was. In 2020, the Chechen diaspora started gathering in Berlin. Well, that would mean thousands of Chechens would come here and start fighting, mainly with those Arab clans, led by the Remo clan. Well, the police knew that the streets would have to be flooded with blood. They were afraid of that. They were looking for someone who could talk to them, some kind of authority who could speak to them, and they found such a person. But that person was Manuel Shah. Well, that's a well-known name. Those who are interested in sports, especially boxing, know that he is one of the best boxers, a world boxing champion, a Syrian man born in Lebanon, a boxer, an authority for both sides as well. The police simply asked him to sit down at the table with the clans, to sit down at the table with the Chechens, and to start talking with them. And indeed, the boxer came to Berlin and started mediating with them. And it simply ended in success. They somehow came to an agreement. There was no bloodshed, no shootings, no killings. You could say that the situation calmed down, but you can also see from this what kind of world it is. I would say that those regulations that exist are not important. The city I live in isn't important, and I follow completely different rules. But the world of these clans today isn't just a world of typical brutal crime, let's say. It's also a world of crime that's a bit more intellectual. We have to remember that today's clan leaders are people who already have German citizenship, most often born in Germany. Men in their 40s and 50s, they are the ones leading these clans today. I would say that in some way they are not ashamed of who they are or what they do. This is an example of one of the more famous rappers. Bushido is a well-known rapper throughout Germany, and he is also known in Poland. People know him and listen to him. At some point, Bushido got into some trouble or had a falling out with his own record label, so he was looking for someone, looking for money, people who would help him release albums and organize concerts. That's when he contacted a clan leader who became interested in him. After some time, they signed a contract. It turned out that Bushido had to give him half of his royalties, half of his concert income, which of course was a huge amount of money. In a short time, he became just a money-making machine for him. When Bushido realized he was being exploited, he wanted to quit, but then they threatened that his wife and children would be cut up, so he continued to work this way. At some point, he went to a rival clan, and basically while being in that rival clan, they started helping him so much that he became a money-making machine for this second rival clan. So in a way, he went from the frying pan into the fire, but also the leader of that clan would take pictures with him, go to concerts, and they would post the photos online. He wasn't ashamed of what he was doing, of who he was, and he was widely known for it. The fights between clans and gangs in Berlin are the other face of this beautiful city. Something that, of course, the police know about and the prosecutors know about. Sometimes it affects ordinary people. These gangs are fighting each other all the time, fighting for influence, fighting for more neighborhoods, fighting to make money. These are fights, I would say, typical based on, let's call it, material reasons. But of course, there are also ethnic conflicts like the Kurds fighting with the Syrians, for example, but there are others as well. And this is something new. This is something new that has also appeared, I would say, in the criminal history of Germany. These are also groups of young people already born here in Germany, people for whom it doesn't matter where or in which group they are, Who their ancestors are doesn't matter to them, but what is important is who they spent their childhood with and where they were born. These are friends from the same apartment block, from the same class, and I would say that neighborhood or block-based criminal groups are formed, and for them, the most important thing is where they come from and from which area. It's less important who their grandparents were or who their parents were. I would say it's a kind of analogy as well. It made me think of our local hooligans because after all they usually come from the same apartment block, from the same neighborhood. What's more, we have so-called arranged fights. In Germany a new term has appeared, traveling crimes, which explains what it means. When one group has something against another, they arrange a fight through messengers. They set up such a fight. Well, in the Polish version, it's simply called an arranged fight. They arrange it among themselves and fight because of it. Up until now, this crime, I'm saying up until now because it's been going on for several years. Well, we can calculate that roughly. When the Chechens wanted to enter the city, they entered the city. It was 2020, so it's been going on for 5-6 years now. This crime became notorious because these young people don't settle their matters quietly in some neighborhood, but instead they go out and roam around the city. These showdowns often happen in cafes, restaurants, they're just out on the streets, and that's what made it notorious. And that probably also motivated the German authorities to introduce this program and try to deal with it. This is clearly difficult given how many people there are, the types of problems, and how challenging it is to handle everything. But also, when starting today's episode, I mentioned that this is also a lesson for us, for Poles, about how all of this begins, how it is born, assuming that these people who came here will someday return to their own countries because everything will calm down. It looks like they won't return, that they will stay, and that a program is needed. The Germans introduced such a program over 50 years later. Of course, too late. Pretending that there is no problem, creating such a parallel community that doesn't really care about or respect local customary law. And also some idea of what to do with these young people who are here, what to do with them so that they have something to do. Just like in the case of Berlin, for example, where those asylum centers became places where new recruits for criminals were being recruited. These are conclusions that can also be drawn here in our country. And basically that's all for this episode, the episode from Berlin, which also relates a bit to our situation. We'll stay in Germany a bit longer because since we're here, we want to look for some more interesting topics to talk about. And that's all for today. We're saying goodbye from in front of the Reichstag, also a historical, I would say, building known in Poland. We're saying goodbye from here. Of course, watch us, subscribe to the channel, and as always, take care.